Uncle Dan.
Hey,
We're going through a weird moment right now in the world.
I'm going through a weird moment right now just in this chair.
Change.
On top of the global pandemic and the protests over police brutality and everything else that seems to be falling on our heads right now, one of those things is some statues that never should have been there in the first place.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah,
So-
we got a few of those in this country.
there's too many. So I think Uncle Mark's going to give us...
I think there's just too many fucking statues. It's not that they're of racist. It's just that they're too numerous.
How dare you? I love statuary.
I do too.
Sculpture is one of my favorite art forms. So
I love statuary, but let's get into it.
Okay.
So you guys know that I work in the visual arts, and I have a great appreciation, as Dan was saying, of all things art and creativity. And I was on my way to a fine arts degree before I dropped out because I wanted to just start making money rather than going to 7:30 a.m. pen and ink classes. So today I want to talk about symbols. And as we all know, and we've talked about plenty of them on the show, the world of religion is saturated with symbols, whether the crucifix, the Star of David, whatever the new nip-slip Mormon thing is, et cetera, et cetera. Symbols are a signifier of belonging, of membership, but they can also be warnings. So for me, a swastika or an SS Death Head symbol comes to mind immediately. or say the biohazard symbol, which is very au courant at the moment. And while the argument never stops raging about whether or not America is a Christian nation, and by design it is not, our national identity and landscape are awash in symbols as well, whether it's Old Glory or the cursed stars and bars of the Confederacy. But it's abso-fucking-lutely critical we understand that symbols don't mean the same thing to all Americans. Bullet-headed New Orleans Saints quarterback Drew Brees drew fire from his black teammates for A, insisting Colin Kaepernick's kneeling NFL protest was intended as disrespect for the U.S. flag. It was not, and Kaepernick only said so himself 12 million times. And that B, because the flag means so fucking much to him, Drew Brees, that everybody else was goddamned obliged to feel and act the same way about it.
right.
There was such a massive pushback from Brees' teammates and other black voices, including sportscaster Shannon Sharp, that Brees actually apologized, seeming to have let new information penetrate his thick skull and cause him to reflect.
Well, that's downright un-American right there.
Can I just interject another possible motive for him apologizing? That the line of men who protect him from skull injury every day
are pretty
black.
much all black.
Yeah.
And he's a quarterback of a beloved team in one of America's most celebrated black cities.
Right.
So what an idiot. So it seems like it did cause him to reflect. Sharp's comments, you should look them up. He was kind of amazing. Challenged Brees to understand that the Stars and Stripes maybe don't mean the same thing to all Americans, so he can fuck off with insisting it has to. So let's talk about another flag. The Stars and Bars of the racist, theocratic United States of the Confederacy. It was the battle flag of a republic that chose to march to national suicide and annihilation against the more populous, more industrialized North for the express purpose of defending their God-given right to own and exploit other human beings.
Right.
This is a fact that is not in dispute. I've tried...
Not in dispute by historians.
Right, exactly.
By people who actually know things. So as I've tried to pound new information through my own thick skull these past few weeks, I took Killer Mike's advice and read the Cornerstone speech. This was a speech given by Alexander Stephens, the vice president of the Confederacy, just weeks before the first shots were fired at Fort Sumter. It leaves no doubt that the Confederacy would die defending a certain God-ordained institution, and I quote, The new Constitution has put to rest forever all the agitating questions relating to our peculiar institution, African slavery, as it exists amongst us, the proper status of the Negro in our form of civilization. This was the immediate cause of the late rupture and the present revolution, meaning the secession and the coming war.
Right.
Our new government is founded upon, I'm jumping ahead a bit. Our new government is founded upon exactly the opposite idea. Its foundations are laid. Its cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery's subordination to the superior race is his natural and normal condition. This, our new government, is the first in the history of the world based upon this great physical, philosophical, and moral truth. So, the founding and defining principle of the Confederacy was their God-given right to practice slavery forever. Miss me with the states' rights bullshit. States' rights to do what exactly?
You're right.
To fucking own people and expend their lives in the service of your money. So, despite getting roundly defeated...
I apologize that my cat is interrupting such... I'm like waving my arms at her to get her to stop meowing. And she's just looking at me.
She's very adamant about the Black Lives Matter movement.
She's a black cat.
Yeah.
She is hearing it.
She's got something to say, and I welcome it. So, despite getting roundly defeated, and even Robert E. Lee himself saying it was all over, so knock all that shit off, the battle flag of the Confederacy started popping up in the decades after the war and emancipation. It took extremely open racist Dylan Roof murdering 9 human beings who had welcomed him into their Bible study group in South Carolina, and activist Bree Newsom climbing the flagpole and pulling it down in a guerrilla move to finally get that fucking symbol of hate removed from the Capitol grounds in South Carolina for good, where it had been placed, not in 1861, but in 1961 as a reaction to the budding civil rights movement and desegregation. And remember, the flag in question is not the national flag of the Confederacy, but the standard it flew expressly for war. It has a totally different flag it had a different national flag. 7 southern states still have a version of the stars and bars and or the Confederate national flag incorporated into their flags. Some created just after the state in question lost in its attempted insurrection for the purpose of owning human beings. Some, perhaps worse, were adopted much later, including Alabama in 1895, Arkansas in 1913, Florida in 1897, and most insidiously, Georgia, which added the Confederate battle flag to its design in 1956. It's only recently been modified again. So, 1/3 of black Americans live in states where this symbol of theocratic, enslaving evil was added after the country it represented was pounded into sand. Why? And it's not just the Confederate battle flag, which I think should rightly be viewed as the American swastika. Not just in its original use, but by those who continue to use it as a signal of their hatred and a means of terrorizing black people. The South, but weirdly not exclusively the South, is dotted with monuments and statuary of defeated pro-slavery insurrectionists. I've personally spent quite a bit of time in parts of the South. Dan, you came to visit me there a couple of years back. I've seen black kids playing Frisbee in the shadow of the John C. Calhoun statue in Charleston. And for those that don't know, he may have been the fiercest defender of slavery since the God of the Old Testament. I caught my breath a bit walking onto the Texas state capitol grounds and seeing a monument to, quote, our glorious Confederate war dead.
Yeah, it's the biggest monument on the grounds, and it's shocking.
It's a bit shocking. In New Orleans, on my walk to work, it included a stroll through Lee Circle, where the treasonous warlord until recently stood atop a grand column, but the city of New Orleans has taken it down. And every time I would brush the dissonance off by thinking, this is super fucked up, but I'm not from here, so maybe I just don't get it. Well, it turns out the vast majority of these regal monuments to the glorious lost cause were not put up by grieving widows and communities still echoing with the cannon fire so recently silenced. The bulk of them were put up between 1900 and the 1950s, 40 to 90 years after the beautiful dream of owning people forever as God intended, as laid out with diamond-like clarity by Confederate Vice President Alexander Stephens, was blown to smithereens by Union artillery. Again, why?
Yeah.
So, like the rebel battle flag being added to state flags as late as 1956, these monuments were put up with violent intent. It was a psychological warfare operation mostly carried out by the genteel, daytime version of the Ku Klux Klan, the Daughters of the Confederacy. These symbols were as deliberate an act of terrorism as burning a cross in a family's front yard, but maybe even worse, because they weren't put up by masked cowards under the cover of darkness, but by mayors and city councils and chambers of commerce and ladies' auxiliary committees. These were erected in the light of day by the government and business classes of the white power structures to make sure their black neighbors knew exactly how things were going to be.
Right.
Heritage and culture, my ass. They were a reminder of who was in charge and what values and ideals those people still maintained. So, we recently saw the statue of the hideous slave trader Edward Colston torn down and rolled to the river for an afternoon of water sport by the good people of Bristol in the UK.
Yeah.
And Christopher Columbus statues were torn down in both Virginia and Minnesota, as well as one being decapitated in Boston this past week. And
Did you see that great where a bunch of the map apps in those cities relocated the position of those statues to the river?
Now, I'm not necessarily advocating violence or destruction. However, the goodly white citizens of newly destatued municipalities mustn't linger too long on the fainting couch without considering that if their precious symbols were erected with violent intent, removing them with violent intent is kind of fair play, no?
Right.
So true.
Why should the people these symbols were designed to oppress play any nicer than your grandpappy did when he used taxpayer money to put them up? So,
yeah, it's
that
not
brings-
violence against people. That's violence against a big piece of metal. I think
symbol.
it's okay.
It's like flag burning.
Right.
You know, it's a symbol, and you can put it in your front yard or you can burn it. That's what you do with symbols, right? So that brings us back here to Utah. We were not meant to be a state, but rather a theocratic empire, very much like the Confederacy. When in 1847, the Mormons occupied this Ute, Paiute, Goshute, and Shoshone land that was outside the United States at the time because Mexico laid claim to it. The would-be emperor of this stolen territory was an imperious piece of shit by the name Brigham Young, who our friend Bryce Blankenagel describes as the Mormon Hitler. I would say Stalin, but what's a little argument about mustache widths between friends? So, to be absolutely clear...
Wait, he was the one who didn't have a mustache. He had a big beard without mustache. So he can't be either of those guys. Both of you are ridiculous.
Dictatorial facial hair can be very, very incoherent.
Is that kind of how, like, if you become a dictator, you have to go to the clubhouse and select facial hair that has not been done before? Is that how it works?
I think that's true.
I've still never understood the choice of Hitler's mustache. Like, what? How do you arrive at that? I don't know.
He was a huge Chaplin fan.
Yeah, exactly. The choice I find
was a
weirder
huge fan of his.
Is Michael Jordan's version of the Hitler mustache, which I think Hitler kind of ruined that mustache for a while.
That's right. Michael Jordan did that too. That was so bizarre.
So weird.
So, to be absolutely clear, and not only the non-Mormon historical record backs me up on this, but so do the official writings of the church. Brigham Young was a man of consummate evil. Not just by today's standards, but his own as well. He was deeply hateful of black people and robustly pro-slavery. He owned the man who entered the Salt Lake Valley 1 second before he did, an enslaved black person called Green Flake, because he was driving the wagon Brigham's sick, ample rump was laying in. He made the Utah Territory the only American slave territory outside of the South. He was a mass murderer who ordered the massacres of at least hundreds, likely far more indigenous people. The order for the Timpanogos massacre being just one example where probably 100 died. And likely even gave the order that took the lives of over 100 California-bound white Arkansas settlers at the Mountain Meadows Massacre, which Doug discussed in episode 51.
In fairness, he had an intestinal thing that made him grumpy.
So. He was a grumpy man, and he looked like it. As he was both the civil and ecclesiastical master of his people, he was basically responsible for everything that happened in the territory, where a fairly common practice was capturing or buying indigenous children to be slaves in white households, most of whom only lived to be about 20. There's record of hundreds of these cases. He had no less than 3 dedicated assassins whom he directed to commit an unknown number of blood atonements, which were just extrajudicial murders of people he hated. You can listen to our segment about that in episode 50. Here are some quotes, and there are many more, from our friend Brigham Young pertaining to slavery and black people generally. You must think, from what I say, that I'm opposed to slavery. No! Exclamation point. The Negro is damned. and is to serve his master till God chooses to remove the curse of Ham. Another one is, shall I tell you the law of God in regard to the African race? If the white man who belongs to the chosen seed mixes his blood with the seed of Cain, the penalty under the law of God is death on the spot. This will always be so.
Wow.
Any man having one drop of the seed of Cain in him cannot hold the priesthood. I will say it now in the name of Jesus Christ. I know it's true, and they know it's true. Jesus Christ, who probably had more than a drop of black blood in him, but let's continue. I know it is true, and they know it. The Negro cannot hold one particle of government. If any man mingles his seed with the seed of Cain, the only way he could get rid of it or have salvation would be to come forward and have his head cut off and spill his blood upon the ground. It would also take the life of his children. That is him saying that the babies of mixed race relationships should be decapitated.
And here's the thing: is we know these quotes. A lot of them we know quite well, and there's many, many more. But these things were not said or thought in a vacuum.
No.
Right? There was an entire cultural architecture within which these were acceptable things to say.
Yeah.
Right. And so, we're not cherry picking, I guess is the point I'm trying to say, is like, this guy was to his core a fucking evil racist, and he ran an evil racist institution.
Yes.
How great is it though when one of these assholes, especially the leader of a religion, says, "And that will be the way it is forever." Because it's just a beautiful way to trap yourself into proving that you were a fraud.
I think in baseball they call that calling your shot. It's a bold move.
Yeah. Well, it's one thing to call your shot. It's one thing to call your shot when you're 0 and 10 billion.
Right. And as Doug said, it's a despicable racist institution that took a century, 100 fucking years after he said these things to begin to do away with it, right? The priesthood ban was done away with in 1978, almost 150 years, 120 years after he said some of this stuff. So here's another quote. Now remember, he was the religious authority, God's greatest religious authority on earth, but he was also the ruler of this territory. So he was also the civic leader. And here he is speaking as his civic leader at a joint session of the Utah legislature. I have this section in my hand headed "An Act in Relation to African Slavery." I have read it over and made a few alterations. I will remark with regard to slavery, inasmuch as we believe in the Bible, inasmuch as we believe in the ordinances of God, in the priesthood and order and decrees of God, we must believe in slavery. This colored race has been subjected to severe curses, which they have in their families and in their classes and in their various capacities brought upon themselves.
Oof.
And until the curse is removed by him who placed it upon them, they must suffer under its consequences. I am not authorized to remove it. I am a firm believer in slavery.
Jesus. Yeah. And remember, again, he wasn't just the ruler of this religion and this territory for a short period of time. He was that guy for 40 fucking years.
Yeah, so he was an emperor.
Imagine any institution, bears the marks of its leadership.
Yep.
And any institution that's led for 40 years by a guy with this mindset is not going to come out of that a woke institution.
He is the skeleton on which the body of Mormonism is built. And they are inseparable. So he continues in that same speech. I would like masters to behave well to their servants and to see that every person in this territory is well used. When a master has a Negro and uses him well, he is much better off than if he was free. As for masters knocking them down and whipping them and breaking the limbs of their servants, I have as little opinion of that as any person can have. But good, wholesome servitude, I know there is nothing better than that.
Oh, it's wholesome.
Yeah.
Wow. That's
what
nice.
A fucking monster. So Brigham Young was and is garbage. A frothing racist, a criminal, and a mass murderer. He was also the second prophet of the Mormon Church and the founder and first governor of the state of Utah. He is revered in Mormonism, a church that has decided to go so whole fucking hog with this excremental anti-American monster to the extent that they've named their most prestigious institution, Brigham Young University, after him, as well as 3 other air quotes universities. These are simply the facts, and this is the actual history. But here in sleepy Salt Lake City, there are at least 2 taxpayer-funded, heroically rendered Brigham Young statues on public land. There's yet another one that was bought by taxpayers that 20 years ago declared sanctuary inches from public property on a church-owned park, I'm using air quotes, that used to be a public street before the city sold it to them for some magic beans. That's a story for another day. But and I think it's high time we decide if that's something we, fellow Salt Lakers and Utahns, are willing to put up with. A public monument is not how we record history. It's a statement of community values. The mayor and the city council and the Utah legislature had meetings, kept minutes, appropriated funds in order to declare our civic values in the form of expensive public monuments in the shape of Brigham Young. But as I've demonstrated, Brigham Young was a fucking monster and a disgrace, and the shadow his bronzes cast over our community is a stain I think we should refuse to tolerate. So you might say, okay, Uncle Mark, Utah is 93% white. Just under 2% of the population is black. Okay, sure, that doesn't seem like much, but that's nearly 50,000 black fellow Utahns. And despite Brigham Young's best efforts, the number of indigenous Utahns is about the same. So we're telling 100,000 of our neighbors to just fucking deal with our choice to blemish the landscape with the image of a man who used all his dictatorial powers to enslave and murder their great-great-grandparents. You may be okay with that. I certainly am not. But why should we only give a shit about this awful man's crimes and psychopathy in the presence of our black and indigenous countrymen?
Right.
Does his evil only exist in their presence? Let's pretend Utah was as Brigham Young dreamt of it, with only lily-white Mormons from Vernal to Wendover and from Logan to Laverkin. Excuse me. Are we off the hook then? I'm going to go with no. These monuments to the murderous, theocratic, Confederate, self-styled Old Testament Pharaoh, Brigham Young, are not really about him. They're about us. Mm-hmm. To my fellow Salt Lakers and fellow Utahns, are his values and ideals what we want to be known and understood for? We can do nothing to change that he stole this land to found a racist, misogynist, theocratic empire and ended up having to settle for this stupid square state. But we can do nothing to change the fact that because of this pretentious would-be emperor, the origins of church and this state were inseparable. And the Mormon church can cling to this evil, hideous fuck and his name and his works until white Jesus comes back. But we, the tax-paying public, don't have to. And we should shit this insidious motherfucker's poison out like a bad oyster. And lest we forget, every state has 2 statues in the U.S. Capitol in D.C. One of ours is Philo Farnsworth, the inventor of television, among a million other modern things, so that's pretty cool. The other is the aforementioned evil shitbag Brigham Young. We have chosen to tell the whole country that Brigham Young represents who and what we are. And the great irony is he's on display in the seat of power of a nation he fucking despised and meant to both flee and make war against. What a train wreck of a symbol. So this makes me a little fucking crazy. It's an embarrassment. But that's my take on on the power of symbols, for good and bad. And I think this is a conversation that Utahns need to have.
Yes.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And up at the Capitol in here in Utah, our Capitol grounds are beautiful. It's a beautiful Capitol.
Yeah, it's a great building.
It's positioned on a beautiful hill above the city.
And unlike many U.S. capitals, not built by slaves. So we do have that.
Yeah, that's Hey!
I do have a little update for you, because you mentioned Philo T. Farnsworth's statue in the nation's capital. It's been replaced, or at least it's being replaced.
Oh no!
So that one's the one that's already coming down, but it's being replaced by Martha Q. Cannon, she's amazing, and I love or Martha Hughes Cannon. Sorry,
Right.
So that's actually a really cool thing.
That's a great story we need to tell sometime because it is. It goes against all the grain of the Mormon patriarchy. It's kind of wonderful.
It is wonderful and feminist and awesome. They just replaced the wrong fucking statue.
Right. It's proof that statues can be replaced.
Right?
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. So, there's the one at This Is the Place Monument. There's one inside our Capitol building.
Right, of course.
A Brigham Young statue. And then the one that was moved is just onto church property. So that's their business. And, they can do what they want with that. And I think making them defend him will show their true colors. And I think we should, as a community, force them into that position.
Well, and, we were talking about this in the patrons-only content, but it's, the point of this is not to erase history. In fact, we all are firm believers, I think, in the axiom that people who forget their history are doomed to repeat it. Mm. We don't want Brigham Young stricken from the history books. We just want the fucking true history to be told.
Yeah.
And
there's a difference between telling history and, as you pointed out, Doug, venerating certain figures.
There's a difference between remembering and venerating. And we've put people like Brigham Young and Robert E. Lee at Nathan Bedford Forrest, etc. On pedestals where they do not fucking belong. And the point of them of doing that was to terrorize people.
Yeah. Even if they did a few amazing things, guess what? Atrocities cancel out those things.
Yeah.
So you don't maybe Brigham deserved a lot of props for a lot of stuff. I think that's that's an arguable position, but who the fuck cares? He was also a monster, so you don't get to have his statue up.
Yeah, would the three of us go to sleep at night in a city that if a stranger drove into the city and looked at our monuments, they would say, this is the guy they revere.
Yep.
Right? And I don't think that's okay.
Well, and also I think a lot of those quotes, a couple of the quotes you read, Mark, I had not heard before.
Yeah.
Most of them I had, but I venture to bet that most true believing Mormons have not.
Right? Oh, no, none of them have.
The version of Brigham Young, in fact, I have a DVD that was given to me as a joke gift that was a one-man play a la kind of like a Mark Twain play called Brother Brigham.
Like a monologue, yeah.
Yeah, and he's this kind of salt of the earth guy
folksy,
grandfatherly. And I think that's how most Mormons conceive of Brigham Young as this.
Right.
They venerate him because they do not know who he truly was. They are ignorant of the character of Brigham Young as he really was.
Yeah, well, we've said before on the show, to be a true believing Mormon is an exercise in knowing as little about your church's history as possible.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah,
and they do great with it. They do a really good job.
So what are we going to do here? It is going to be an uphill battle to get Utah to take this man's statue down. So
let's grab it and put it in the river.
It may never happen, but I think it's a conversation that needs to be had.
Take it down. Violence.
Donald Trump was the other day. This was actually back during the Charlottesville, those heady days, a couple years ago, and he was saying something like, "Well, I noticed they're tearing down Confederate statues. I wonder, is the Washington Monument next?" And it's this fear on particularly the right about the tearing down of these statues that, where does it end? Where does it end? It's like, it doesn't matter where it ends. It matters that it starts. Like we need to get this shit going.
We can
it
at
could
least
go bad, so let's do nothing.
Right, exactly. What if they tear down the wrong statue? Then what? We'll all explode.
I just, for people who Republicans in the right wing that have defunded the arts for years,
right?
It's interesting to see them rush to its defense. Because it was, for people who owned slaves and murdered people. So that's it, Brigham. Get the fuck out. I'm sick of him.
All right.
Well, thanks for that. We're all grumpy now. Let's move on.